Welcome back to the Best Self Diary, where I once a week sit down and go over the ideas and principle that has had the biggest impact on me this last week, and hopefully also will benefit you in your journey of creating the life you want to live and becoming the best version of yourself and your best self. This week has definitely surprised with a lot of different insights and has been very interesting to live through and to embrace while going through it. But I really want to touch on a couple different points, but very specific points that are all interconnected and correlated in specific ways that we'll dive into today. But overall, we'll definitely be looking at some points regarding our thoughts and emotions and how we can let go of emotions in order to actually take back our control and how we, through letting go, lose the sense of being controlled. Um, Furthermore than that, we'll go into sacrifices and choices that, by the sound of it, has been impactful for me this last week, and something I really wanted to get into. Um, Specifically diving into the meaning and the impact that you can really find in choices and in making decisions based on value and intention. And lastly, we'll dive into off the back and connect it with sacrifices and choices, how we can essentially create an everyday life that really aligns with our greater values and greater vision for life and what we really want to live like, by choosing how we spend our time with intention and alignment. So, a lot to cover today, some very big and abstract points and topics to cover, but we'll definitely get into it more and more in depth and really dissect these ideas. So, without further ado, welcome back to the podcast. Let's get into it. First off, on the idea of our thoughts, our emotions, and our feelings, and emotional well being in general, our mental well being. Because I think everyone has this sense of always being undermined or controlled, or at least in a way, not controlled, but always having to think twice and always having to ask what our thoughts really mean and always question our thoughts and always be influenced by our mind and what is happening in our minds and in our mentality and our mental state. And I think a lot of people would like to let go of that and quiet down our minds and simply be in a state of amazing bliss and not be so influenced and controlled by our minds and our thoughts and our emotions. But I think this is really what we've been diving into in terms of mind and our thoughts, that we essentially have different parts of ourselves that are parts of us for a reason, right? And our emotions are no different. Our emotions are part of us, and our feelings are part of us, and they are part of us for a reason. And they are not without meaning. They are not without importance or significance. But how we choose to listen to them and what we choose to be aware of is the significant part, and is the part where we take back control without being in a position of power. Um, or rather, you could even reverse it and say we take back power without being in a position of control. It's abstract for now, but hang with me for just a bit, because these parts of us, these ideas, these thoughts and emotions that are constantly pressing and that we are constantly fighting, um, all have something to say. They all have a part to play in our journey and in who we are and in becoming who we want to be. They're always nudging us in different directions and telling us what direction and path to take or go and what to follow. And it becomes very overwhelming. But the idea is really that in order to let go of this influence that our thoughts and mind has over us, or in order to take back control rather and be in a position of power, we have to let go. And we do that by listening to these thoughts. And before jumping to the conclusion that you now need to listen and affirm and make all your thoughts a reality, that is not the idea. The idea is that by suppressing our thoughts and by avoiding our emotions and what happens in our mind, we don't get the entire picture, and we are constantly battling and fighting for this attention that or energy that our minds and brain has. And when we're spending so much, when we are suppressing and fighting these emotions, we are actually expending energy and effort in order to try to fight them. Whereas if we simply affirmed them, took a moment to listen to them, and simply just was for a moment and concentrated on being in this thought, feeling it for a brief moment, and then moving on, passing on, you would realize that this is the exact way that you actually quiet down these emotions and these thoughts. Because often these thoughts are just parts of us that wants to be heard. And that's their need. Their need is not to be fulfilled or come to fruition. Their need is to be heard. And it might sound very simple, but that's because it is. And I challenge you to try this. Whenever you have a thought, simply just try to notice it, affirm it, listen to it, and then move past it. Because obviously, not going too deep into this, there will always be a balance between listening and affirming to thoughts and going into them and trying to understand them, and then simply moving on and knowing that we are in a state of flow and do not have to breach this moment and situation of flow with unnecessary thoughts that are changing our mental. Um, but the idea is really that we find a balance between not paying attention to our thoughts and then paying a lot of attention to our thoughts, but simply finding a balance in between, of course, for moments or for brief situations. And as a rule of thumb, of course, deep reflection always has a point of importance and significance. And I urge you to do that as well, to really let thoughts and emotions flow, rather. But in our everyday life, in order to not be bombarded and overwhelmed by these thoughts and emotions, especially, letting go of them and simply accepting them for what they are is very, very powerful, because it is as like that the moment you say, you do not have any power over me, this emotion does not have any power over me, and I do not really care for it, is the moment that you take back control and power, that the thoughts and emotions lose their power and control over you. And it is derived from the idea that we are not our thoughts, that our brain is a super computer almost, generating input and output and always analyzing, but we are not that. We are more than that. And we are also less, because we have millions of thoughts per day, but those thoughts do not make us. What makes us is the thoughts we choose to act on, the thoughts we choose to make a reality and behave like in accordance with. And that's what makes us and who we are. But the thoughts we have are simply thoughts. And there's a principle that says that there's a big difference between thoughts and thinking, and that thoughts will always flow, and that thoughts is the natural state of being and the natural state of curiosity, but also bliss, and simply being in connection with nothingness and everything at the same time, but having no intention behind. That's thoughts. But on the other hand side, we have thinking, and thinking is deliberately and actively choosing to think about thoughts and think about feelings and think about emotions and actively turn on our brain and mind in order to process information, whereas thoughts are simply sparks of information and insight. And that there is a big difference between the two. And knowing this difference will definitely have a huge impact in the way you respond to them, but also in the way you respond to your emotions, and even how you can free yourself of the sense of suffering in emotions, because suffering is the creation of thinking, not thoughts. No thought is in reality inherently either bad or good, positive or negative, but rather just neutral and a thought. It's simply what it is. And we simply make it either negative or positive by thinking so. And that is why when we change our thinking and we change our way of seeing these thoughts and emotions and feelings coming up, we change our relationship with them and we can move on from them in a much more productive but also freeing manner. And in that way, take back power and control and liberating ourselves of the iron grip that our minds can have on us if we let it have it. And this is really an idea that I had highlighted really, really mm, strongly this week and dove into it as well. Um, but the idea of it really made a significant impact on me, that once we simply choose to allow our thoughts to surface and just be, and almost as a cloud coming in to our consciousness and then passing by, and simply acknowledging that it is there and then letting it move on, is the most liberating way of answering to our thoughts and paying attention to them. Because there's a lot to learn, a lot of lessons to be found in our thoughts. But it is not all thoughts that have these lessons and insights. And we need to be able to choose between them in order to not be overwhelmed and to have an overcast mind, in the um, metaphor speaking of clouds. I hope this idea will bring some clarity to you as well and let you take back some control of your thoughts without the element of control, because the product or result of this is not getting back control, but rather liberating yourself from the control of your mind. And that is essentially how you then gain control back. This idea really spills well into the next idea that I really wanted to discuss today and dive into, which is the both significance but also importance of how we choose to spend our time and how we choose to spend our energy um, in the physical world instead of in our mental being, what thoughts to choose to react to. We simply now move on to the physical equivalent and which actions, which choices we choose to react to and make active and make come to fruition. Because I think, and this is the idea that really dawned on me this week, and I've been talking about it earlier as well, but this idea that, you know, in life, we will always have to make choices. And we will always have to make both small and big choices, and less significant, but also major impactful choices and decisions. And I always come back to this idea when making a choice that we, if we could have it all, if we could have everything, right? In a big decision making process of saying, do I want this or do I want that? Do I want to pursue this or that? Do I want to go here or go there, or do I choose this or that? And it can be as trivial as to what's for dinner or what movie to watch. But it can also be as impactful as to what country to move to or what career to pursue, right? And I think if we could have everything, if we could do everything, if we could choose every option, then the choices would be meaningless. Because The notion that we cannot have everything, that our time is limited and that there is no going back, is the very notion that brings value to our choices and to the decisions we're making. Because if not, and we could do everything, then life would simply be an experiment, right? It would be a collection in a way, and it would be trying everything. But what is the point of trying everything if that then means that you wouldn't lose out on something? What meaning would something have if you could always go back and have something else? And I'm, of course, extending this point to a extreme degree because, of course, some choices can be reversed and some choices are meant to be gateways or pathways to different situations. And of course, life is inherently beautiful and inspiring, and there really is no end to our discoveries and our exploration in reality. But I think if our time was not limited and we had all the time in the world, the exploration and the importance of making the most of our time and the attempt to experiment and try everything there is to try, it would fade if we had no sense of urgency, if we had no sense of limitation, because then we could always try everything. And of course, there's a difference in being able to do everything at once and then being able to do something or everything else at a different time. But I think it really comes down to it at the end of the day, it really comes down to that whenever we make choices, the reason the choices are hard to make is because we know we have to choose one thing over the other and that we cannot have everything. And I think that is the value of choice. I think that's what brings it value, and that's why they're so significant. And I think that is why we have to not be careful in the way of being afraid of making the wrong decision, because, and this is not an idea I'll expand more extensively in this episode, but inherently we have time, right? And the whole journey of life is to explore as much as possible, right? So there are no right or wrong choices, only the choice not made and the steps not taken, rather. Because all experience will get us closer to the end point and to the story we're writing. So it is not about being cautious in the way of making the wrong choice, but it is about being deliberate and being intentional in choosing to spend our time, our days, our effort and energy, and essentially our lives in a manner that aligns with what we truly value and what we find important, what matters to us. Because we spend the way we spend our time and the way we spend our days is essentially how we spend our lives. If you think back on your life now, I don't think you've ever thought, or maybe you have, that today this is how I live my life. But rather, you would say, this is today. We see it as an isolated period of time. We even say a week, a month, or a year. But essentially, how our day passes by, how our days are moving by, and how we're spending our time throughout the days is how we're spending our lives. It's what the activities and what we choose to do on a day-to-day basis that is the active and the actual activities that we spend our lives doing. So I think this is the power of the intention and the importance of choosing with caution, not being able to make the wrong choice, but in but choosing with a deliberate attention to how our time is being spent, and that we in reality should not be spending our time where we do not think our time is well spent, because our time is the only thing in the entire world that once spent you will never get back. And that if you spend your time today doing something you do not enjoy, it might have taken up the time that you could have spent on something you did enjoy. And I think that's a very important point to keep in mind when we make decisions. And it even reverses the question of, or it even reverses the principle of making choices with caution, right? Because if we are making choices for the sake of spending our time the best way possible, the best way to spend our time in making decisions is to make fast decisions and to simply embrace the journey of the decision we made. So, all those trivial questions as to what's for dinner certainly loses a lot of, not importance, but significance in the moment, because in the grand scheme of things, it is just one brief moment. And spending too much time on this moment takes away time from other things. But on the flip side as well, if you are spending time on something and you then see this situation in this moment and this one dinner as something impactful, then it is impactful, right? And I think the moral of the principle is really, and the key takeaway is really that we decide what has meaning and what doesn't, and what has value and what doesn't have value. We decide by the way of our actions and the way of our thinking and the way we spend our time and days, what we truly value, right? Because we are not what we say we will do. We are what we actually do. And in the same way, we do not value what we say we value. We value what we spend our time on. That is the ultimate way of seeing what someone values. How are they actually spending their time? And of course, there'll always be more layers to it, right? There'll always be first, second, and third order consequences of actions. And it might not be because someone is working all day, all night, that work is their highest priority, but maybe safety for their family is, or being a provider, or making an impact for others is their main priority. Maybe that's the value that they choose to cherish. But how we spend our time is ultimately how we show what we value. And I think that's very important to keep in mind, both when we're making decisions and big choices, but also just in the day to day being of life and what we choose to give value. Because I think we have to spend our time while we are here and our everyday lives doing what it is we find value in doing, what it is we find meaningful, and what it is we see align with how we want to spend life, right? If how we spend our days is how we spend our lives, we should be spending our days the way we want to spend our lives, if that makes sense. And I think that is the ultimate state of being and of making the most of this time that we have here, because that is the way you show the importance of your time and show the importance of your actions. And I think that's the ultimate goal of creating the life you want to live. It's showing up in a day or in a way every day and in a manner that aligns with who you want to be and the person you want to be and the life you want to live, the life you want to create, and closing the gap between the life you want to create in general and in its ethereal sense and abstract meaning, but also creating it in the real world and in the real life and in the real manifestation and visual sense of this vision we have. This episode has been insightful for me again to once more explore and discover more of these very, very interesting ideas and intricacies of creating the life we want to live. And I hope you have gotten some takeaways from it as well. And that you, if you enjoyed today's episode, you leave a like and you follow along for more episodes regarding everything there is to create the life that we want to live and become the version we want to and our best self. And if you're interested in more ideas like these, but also want to dive in deeper and more practically and get more steps and guidance to follow in order to create the physical manifestation of these theories and sometimes abstract ideas, you can find the link to our Best Self community in the description. And it is an amazing place to both meet like-minded people and share your journey and connect and share insights and perspectives on what it means to be our best self and how to show up as who we want to and ultimately create the life we want to live. And that has been it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be looking forward to the next one. And until then, I'm rooting for you.